let's move on to our calibration subject. It's going to be short, but it is just a really important thing that doesn't need that much explaining. So, what is contrast, Jules, and why is it important?
Contrast is such a fundamental aspect of picture quality. It is the difference between your darkest black and your brightest white. If you like, comparing it to a piano keyboard, it is how many octaves you've got to play on.
Yeah.
So if you have a limited contrast range, you've got a limited number of octaves. Basically, you can't play as much of a tune. So the deepest blacks, the brightest whites, but it comes with caveats, because what you don't want to do when you're setting your brightest whites is clip any of the detail away from that. By which means you look at snow scenes or clouds. If you push your contrast control, which is your white control, too high, you will lose information, you lose detail in those brighter parts of the image. And conversely, if you go the other way on your ironically named brightness control, which should be actually your black level control, if you push it one way or the other, you could end up crushing shadow detail. You're not actually getting better blacks at all. And on the other hand, you could end up in terms of trying to, you might end up push shadow detail too much that you actually raise your black floor and reduce your contrast at the same time. Those are set by plugge patterns, both black and white. And so you can actually find those on lots of setup discs. You can set your own. You can just check it on your own TV, your own projector. Get a setup disc like Spears and Munsell, set up your black level and your white level correctly, and you'll have maximized your contrast, and you're going to get a much better picture.
Yeah, and it's an important. What's the easiest way of doing this in the quickest way? It's more important with LED LCD displays than OLED displays in terms of your overall contrast. When you're talking about how many steps you have there, Jules, LCD LED has always been a little bit restricted in what it can actually do in terms of contrast, compared to what an OLED can do. So maybe just quickly explain the reason as to why.
Well, yeah, because OLED is a self-emissive display technology, so you can actually literally turn every single pixel off you want to, and you'll get zero. You can't do that with an LCD. It's a transmissive technology, so the light must always be shining at some point to get something on the screen. So you even though that the pixels might be zero, there's still light coming through it, so it raises. You have a raised black floor and a limited contrast range. The way they try and get around that is by sort of full array local dimming or other backlight systems to switch off completely the LED array behind pixels that actually need no illumination. The problem with that is that you can't have as many LED zones as there are pixels on an OLED. So you will end up with some very good black levels, some excellent black levels, but also you have what we have haloing or blooming around objects where you need that array or that zone switched on, so you get that haloing effect as well. So it's more of a struggle on an LCD based display to achieve that. There are also two different ways, or at least two different ways of measuring contrast, where you can have your native on-off contrast, where you put a black field up, you measure that, and your white, you measure that, and that's the difference between the two is your contrast, or ANSI contrast, which is done by measuring a checkerboard pattern, which some manufacturers say is a more realistic method of contrast measurement, because you never watch a completely black screen or a completely white screen. So it's measuring the effect of mixed content, which is pretty much what we watch most of the time.
Yeah. So that's display technology in terms of TVs, but of course projectors are another area where contrast can be a killer. So very briefly, Jules, what should people be looking out for when it comes to projectors and maximizing their contrast so they get the best out of their image?
Well, it's a reflective technology, isn't it? It's that the light's bouncing off the screen. So you can have the best projector in the world, but if your room is reflective, it's going to bounce that light straight back off the walls, back onto the screen, and you're going to kill your black level. So you've then killed your contrast. And as the light or the intensity of what you're watching is increasing, so the light exponentially increases within the room, ends up back on the screen again. There are things you can do about that. You can get ALR screens, ambient light rejecting screens, which will help to maintain that black floor. They usually have some sort of gray base to them, but at the same time, you're also losing off the top end too. However, we are more susceptible to black level than we are to white level in terms of the human visual system. So that must always be borne in mind as well.
Yeah. Again, we've been a bit brief this evening, but we got the points across there. So thank you once again. Jules, again, if you've got questions when it comes to calibration or making up a decent image and what is important, then send your questions in podcast@avforums.com or shove your questions into the podcast thread.